the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you.
A comedian who died in 2008 might have told you exactly what was coming in American politics, and you probably laughed it off as just another joke. But here's the thing, George Carlin wasn't really joking. He spent over 4 decades standing on stages across this country, performing in front of millions of Americans, and described the exact conditions that would eventually put a man like Donald Trump into the highest office in the land. And the wildest part? He practically begged us to pay attention. We just thought he was doing a bit. Now, before we get into the specifics, let's get one thing clear about who George Carlin really was. A lot of people remember him as just a comedian, a funny guy with a ponytail and an attitude. But Carlin was something much bigger than that. He was a social commentator who wrapped his razor-sharp observations in humor so you'd actually sit down and listen. He described his own comedy as focusing on 3 things: his love of language and how we use it, the small everyday moments we all share as human beings, and the big uncomfortable topics of our culture: war, death, politics, religion. This wasn't a man telling jokes about airline food or complaining about his mother-in-law. This was a man dissecting America on a live stage with the precision of a surgeon and the vocabulary of a poet. George Carlin was a wordsmith in the truest, most dangerous sense of that word. He could take something you felt deep in your gut but could never quite articulate and hand it right back to you in a single sentence so sharp it could cut through steel. He didn't just observe American society, he performed an autopsy on it, live while the patient was still breathing. And for over 50 years, audiences kept coming back begging for more. And what he found over those decades on stage? It reads like a prophecy for everything we're living through right now in this country. Let's start with one of his most famous lines. In America, anyone can become president. That's the problem. When Carlin first said that, people laughed. It's a great one-liner, punchy, gets a reaction, but think about what he's really saying underneath the humor. He's not celebrating American democracy. He's issuing a warning about it. He's telling us the system doesn't filter for quality. It doesn't demand excellence or experience. It simply opens the door and says, "Come on in." And that door, it swung wide open for a billionaire real estate developer from New York City who had never held a single day of public office in his life. A man who didn't come from the halls of Congress or the governor's mansion. He came from penthouse suites, corner office boardrooms, and the set of a hit reality TV show. He came directly from the American public, and George Carlin saw that coming, not because he had a crystal ball, but because he understood how the machine actually worked underneath all the noise. Here's where things really start to click into place. In his 1996 HBO special Back in Town, recorded live at the Beacon Theater in New York City, Carlin delivered what might be the most important 3 minutes in stand-up comedy history. He said, "Now, there's one thing you might have noticed I don't complain about: politicians. Everybody complains about politicians. Everybody says they suck. Well, where do people think these politicians come from? They don't fall out of the sky. They don't pass through a membrane from another reality. They come from American parents, American families, American homes, American schools, American churches, American businesses, and American universities. And they're elected by American citizens. This is the best we can do, folks. It's what our system produces. Garbage in, garbage out." Carlin wasn't blaming the politicians. He was blaming us. All of us. He was saying the leaders of this country are a direct mirror of its people. And if the people are more interested in shopping malls than civic duty, if they're more invested in buying sneakers with lights in them than understanding how their government actually works, then guess what kind of leader you're eventually going to get? One who speaks their language, one who doesn't use the polished focus grouped vocabulary of a career Washington politician, but talks like your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner after his 3rd beer. One who says exactly what's on his mind, no filter, no teleprompter, no apology. Sound like anyone you know? But Carlin went even further in that same bit, and this is the part almost nobody talks about. He asked a question that, looking back, should send a chill down your spine. He said, "If it's really just the fault of these politicians, then where are all the other bright people of conscience? Where are all the bright, honest, intelligent Americans ready to step in and save the nation and lead the way?" Then he answered his own question with a smirk. "We don't have people like that in this country. Everybody's at the mall, scratching his ass, picking his nose, taking his credit card out of a fanny pack, and buying a pair of sneakers with lights in them." Now here's where things get genuinely fascinating. Donald Trump positioned himself as exactly that person, the outsider, the non-politician, the one who famously declared, "I alone can fix it." Whether you love the man or absolutely cannot stand him, Trump ran on the exact premise Carlin was describing. He presented himself as someone from outside the broken political class who would step in and rescue the country from itself. He was the living, breathing answer to Carlin's rhetorical question, except Carlin never expected anyone would actually answer it. He never imagined someone would walk out of the American public, skip the entire political ladder, and say, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And this was far from the only time Carlin painted this picture. In his 2005 special Life is Worth Losing, Carlin went nuclear on the American power structure. He talked about the real owners of the country. Not the politicians, not the voters, the owners. He said, "The big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything." He described a system where billionaires and corporate giants had already bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the courts, and the media. And what did these owners want? Obedient workers. People just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, but just dumb enough to passively accept increasingly terrible jobs with lower pay, longer hours, reduced benefits, and vanishing pensions. Now ask yourself, who better to understand that entire system than someone who was literally sitting inside of it? Trump wasn't some guy from small-town Ohio who stumbled onto the truth about American power. He was a man worth billions of dollars who knew exactly how the club operated because he'd been a card-carrying member his entire adult life. When Carlin delivered his legendary line, "It's a big club and you ain't in it," Trump could have walked on stage and said, "He's right, I was in the club, and let me tell you exactly how it works." And in many ways, that's precisely what he did during his campaigns. He openly talked about donating money to politicians on both sides of the aisle. He talked about how the whole system was rigged from the inside. He took the exact insider knowledge that Carlin had been describing for years and weaponized it into a campaign strategy that shook American politics to its absolute core. But there's another layer here that makes Carlin's comedy feel almost supernaturally prescient. Go back to 1992 and his HBO special Jammin' in New York. Carlin riffed on what he called bigger foreign policy. He described how American presidents handle international conflicts through ego, machismo, and chest-thumping bravado. He mocked how the Gulf War was essentially a pissing contest fueled by male insecurity. Then he dropped a line that practically writes tomorrow's headlines. Imagine an American president using the sexual slang of a 13-year-old to describe his foreign policy. In 1992, that got huge laughs from the crowd. By 2018, it was a real news headline. When Trump tweeted at North Korean leader Kim Jong-un about his nuclear button being much bigger and more powerful, it was Carlin's bit from 26 years earlier playing out in real time, almost word for word. The comedian didn't just predict the attitude of a future president. He predicted the exact type of language that president would use on a global stage. And that's what truly set Carlin apart from every other comic who ever lived. He wasn't just funny. He was absolutely forensic. He studied how Americans speak, how they think, how they deceive themselves with their own vocabulary. In his 1990 special Doing It Again, he coined the term soft language to describe how America sanitizes uncomfortable reality through layers of euphemisms. He tracked how shell shock, a raw, honest, two-syllable phrase from World War I, morphed over decades into battle fatigue, then operational exhaustion, and finally post-traumatic stress disorder, with the humanity completely squeezed out of it. Carlin argued that when you soften language, you soften truth. And when you soften truth long enough, people stop recognizing reality altogether. That's the exact cultural environment that allowed someone like Trump to step onto a debate stage, speak bluntly without a single filter, and be celebrated for it. Millions of Americans weren't just voting for a candidate. They were voting against decades of what Carlin called the kind of soft language Americans use to protect themselves from reality. In his 1988 special, What Am I Doing in New Jersey?, Carlin aimed at the foundational hypocrisy of America itself. He said this country was founded by slave owners who wanted to be free. He pointed out that our entire domestic vocabulary is built on the language of warfare. We don't like something in this country, we declare war on it. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on crime. Now listen to Trump's political rhetoric and tell me it's not cut from the exact same cloth. We're going to win so much you'll get tired of winning. We're going to fight. We're going to take our country back. It's the rhetoric of combat applied directly to politics. Carlin identified that uniquely American pattern 3 full decades before Trump turned it into a billion-dollar political brand. Some people will push back and say, Carlin was just a cynic. He didn't predict anything. He just liked to complain. To those people, I'd say, go back and actually listen to his specials, all 14 of them. From the late 80s through his final HBO performance in 2008, it's bad for ya. What you'll find isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Even for just a second, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because if George Carlin taught us anything at all, it's this: the show is never really over. You just have to keep watching.